Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 655 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our ninth book just came out. It's called From Letters to Leaders, The Legacy of Service. So I want you to go and pick up that book on Amazon today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, every now and then I will meet somebody that lives in my hometown of Franklin, Tennessee, that is doing something just absolutely incredible. And I have to tell the whole world about it. This is not just a conversation for those who live in Middle Tennessee. This is a conversation that applies to everybody in the country. It applies to fraternity and sorority when we start thinking about our surroundings and what that means for us as people. So I am just so excited to bring our next guest onto the show. Let me give you a little bit of background because before COVID-19 hit the United States back in 2020, Tammie Osborne spent over a dozen years as an in-demand nationwide healthcare technology executive and consultant, and she was on the road nearly every week. And eventually, Tammie knew she needed to uncover a new normal and one that she hoped to find in a co-working space. She soon learned, however, that her corner of Middle Tennessee didn't really offer what she had envisioned in her mind. So, in true entrepreneur fashion, she discovered a new passion in life, which is to create what she was seeking and build a place where busy women could be productive without distraction. They can continue to grow professionally, socialize, and even exhale every now and then. The Sapphire Suite in Franklin, Tennessee is fashioned as a destination. It's a thoughtful, welcoming place where women can crush all of their task lists. They can conquer new frontiers in a dynamic, nurturing environment of like minded women. In this place, female strengths, intuition, and potential are organically recognized and nurtured, and women will always be made to feel both supported and inspired. Welcome, Tammie, to the show.
Thank you. What an honor. It is very exciting to when I learned that you live in Franklin. So, as I mentioned, we'll have to have an in-person conversation at some point.
Absolutely. I'd love to take a tour of the space. What I see online is just absolutely incredible. And in talking to a lot of the people that we both know, a lot of mutual friends, they just are raving about what you're doing. And so I really thought there were some interesting parallels to fraternity and sorority housing in terms of what you're building. So I just saw a lot of parallel and I said, you know what, let's just talk about it on the show. And your background didn't really start in this co-working space. You actually spent over 2 decades as a nurse, a healthcare executive, an IT leader. So I'm wondering what originally drew you into healthcare?
Well, obviously, I'm very much a people person, I think. And I also happen to be a bit of a math nerd and was on a path for an accounting degree and a career in accounting. And I all of a sudden had this fear that I would end up in a cubicle somewhere. I grew up in a very small town in Eastern North Carolina, and I thought, okay, I definitely want to get out of here. And this is, this will, but if I go the opposite of this, what if I end up in some corporate building in a cubicle, which, I did ask myself a few years later when I was a project manager in a large healthcare enterprise. I'm like, I'm in a cubicle, which is where I did not want to end. But that was just my biggest fear. And I wanted to be in something where I was interacting with people in a more meaningful way. And when I was 19, I had a really positive healthcare experience that put nursing, on my radar. And it felt like the perfect intersection of relationships and problem solving and purpose. And so that's how I ended up, and a love for technology and maybe some regret not going into more technology as computers were coming on the scene, even in the accounting world in high school. Looking back on that, I was like, oh, I think I would rather be doing something with computers. So, and that combined with healthcare, it just happened to be that time when healthcare companies or software companies were looking for people with a background in healthcare that could bridge the gap. And so it seemed like a perfect fit.
Amazing. I love how you just kind of listened to your passions and what was going on in terms of technology in that particular time, and you just kind of position yourself to essentially ride that wave of what you're interested in and what the demand was at that particular time, which I think is really important. And interestingly enough, we share that background in accounting, and my college undergraduate degree is in accounting. I ended
Really?
up in that cubicle, and then I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? This is terrible for somebody who wants to be social, because you're just basically looking at debits and credits all day long. And I felt like my creativity was literally dying on the vine while sitting in that cubicle. And I was like, man, oh man, I got to get out of here before all of my creativity just like evaporates. And then I made that switch and got out of it, which was actually a wonderful blessing for me. So I totally understand where you're coming from in terms of that accounting piece. And during COVID, this was a very interesting time, I think, for everybody. I mean, not everybody can say that they've lived through a pandemic, but we certainly have. Your life completely shifted, just like many others all over the world. So, what was that moment that you realized that I need to build something totally new?
As you mentioned earlier, had been a road warrior
Hmm.
and was used to being in an airport, on a plane, in a corporate office, working with, enterprise sized clients, that type of thing, or somewhere across the country on a regular basis in a particular market. And when COVID hit and a lot of capital dollars were shifted towards COVID efforts, a lot of IT projects got put on the back burner, and also having additional people that just weren't absolutely critical to operations being inside the walls of the hospital. And so a lot of that was dialed back. And after sitting at the dining room table multiple days and doing that from behind the screen, I realized that the part of the work that I love the most is working directly with leaders, building relationships, and helping them solve like complex challenges. And so at the same time, I started thinking, well, where are all the small business owners who don't own brick and mortars? Like, where do they go to they don't have traditional offices, and where are they going to be productive? And so those ideas sort of came together. You can only have so much Starbucks coffee and only so many Panera bagels, or your time limit expires. And I wanted to and needed a space where leaders or business owners could sort of think, plan, and move their work forward with intention, and it not being in a busy, loud coffee shop where you go to the restroom and you have to come back and, play the find a seat game all over again. And so I wanted to create a space where that all of that kind of went away, and support among each other. I can't turn to a stranger in Starbucks and say, "Hey, would you take a look at this proposal for me? What do you think?" And so that really is what inspired it. And my community was out on the road, so I was craving that. I had built relationships all across the country in different markets and with different vendors and organizations, but they were all out on the road. And so I'd been leaving my community every week to go on the road. So
Hmm.
coming back, thought, okay, I feel like I have to start over. So that to me was sort of the moment where it's like, okay, what's out there? Like, what are the options?
Hmm. Well, you're certainly describing a lot of my pain points in Panera and Starbucks. So I
Well,
certainly I feel your pain because this is also a road warrior that you're speaking to. So I feel your pain. I understand those pain points very, very well, and I think you've articulated it very well. So you've articulated the need, I think, beautifully. Now, many of the college students who are listening right now, they are navigating a heck of a lot of uncertainty. Okay. The job market is kind of up, in question right now. We have AI is coming in. So we have this new technology that's completely shifting everything that has happened over the last 100 years. And so there's so much movement, there's so much uncertainty. How did you know when it is time for you to pivot in terms of your career versus just kind of pushing through?
Sure. And you said it. I mean, it's not just even students, but like business owners, from what does AI on the landscape mean? What does the economy mean?
Hmm.
Different things. And so I usually look at it through two different lenses. So I would say that anything meaningful that the students are doing, and we talked about this, I think, pre-call a little bit, is find something that you love and a life that you imagine that you want to live, or the leader that you want to be, or the professional that you want to be. And anything that is, I would say anything that's meaningful and you're working hard towards is going to have a little bit of friction. And I always look at it through two different lenses. So is the work still, or is the challenge still moving me towards that person that I want to become, that leader that I want to become, that career that I'm pursuing? And if it is, then you push through. Now, I think if you're experiencing friction or continuous challenge and you're just miserable and it's taking you in a different direction or it doesn't align with where you see yourself in the future, then I think it's time to pivot and move on.
Those are great tips. I like that a lot. Now, you've obviously intentionally designed this multi-generational women's space in Franklin, my hometown. I'm wondering, like, why did you think that this idea of building this particular space, the way that you've done it, why did you feel so drawn to it? Why is this so important to you, this cause?
Well, I've always learned from the generations, before me. And as a parent of three children and watching a daughter who was sort of that window of being in high school and headed to college that was closing. And I really started looking out there thinking, okay, who are they? Who are they modeling themselves after? Obviously, they look at their parents, but beyond that, and as well as I do, a lot of stuff out there online, and I started thinking about, okay, is this who they're modeling after? And how do I create a space where we can pour into that younger generation, or at least be here as a resource if it's something that they decide to pursue? And like, I like to think there's some benefits of getting old, which is we have a different perspective, or we have wisdom and some seasoning. But I think new leaders, and I would translate that to new business owners as well, which I love here in the space, they bring a new kind of energy, they bring new technology, new ideas. And I looked at what the younger generation is seeing online and thought, okay, following someone isn't the same as building a relationship. And I wanted to create a place where younger professionals, younger business owners could actually interact with and learn from experienced leaders in a more meaningful way, really with relationship and not just following someone online.
Yeah, well, that is really cool. I love that whole idea. I actually was a mentor in at Franklin High School for their entrepreneurial program, and so I'm just thinking about these students in Franklin High School, and they're trying to build these entrepreneurial businesses of their own while they're in high school. And so to have something like your space where they can potentially plug into mentors that are in Franklin that have that background, that have that experience. I mean, what a beautiful thing that would be to pair these high school students with a lot of the people that are hanging out in your dedicated space. So
We're
interesting to
working
me.
on that.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about that, and I can get you connected with them. But you've obviously now you've built this space where I think women from multiple generations, they feel safe, they feel supported, they feel inspired in what it is that they're trying to do. So I'm wondering now, here's like kind of that crossover to, let's say, a sorority house on a college campus. What advice would you give a sorority or a fraternity leader that's trying to cultivate those same feelings of safety, support, and inspiration in their chapter houses?
Yeah, great question. And I think culture is one of those things, especially in today's world, that we throw around a lot, as companies are dealing with challenges of bringing people back to the office, and younger generation, they look at things through definitely a different lens when it comes to culture and freedom and flexibility. And so for me personally, I think that culture is in the small daily behaviors. So like a leader in a fraternity or a sorority, not big speeches, not, in the corporate world, it's not bullet points on the back of your badge, but leaders really set the tone and how they show up. And I think it's the little things and how they communicate, how they treat people. And I always like to say leadership is a responsibility. It's not just a role. And so the members are always watching in the house. And that takes a certain level of maturity to recognize that you're at, and they're at a young age. I mean, they're 19 to 22, that's a young age. And so just being aware that members are always watching, and how are you showing up? How are you being authentic, or how are you being real when interacting with the members? And I think that's something that I guess the Panhellenic or the organizations are it should be on their radar. That takes a certain level of emotional maturity to put a 21-year-old in charge of other 19, 20-year-olds. And
Mhm.
so when choosing those student leaders, I think, but when those leaders show up every day and create an environment of respect and support and being available, I think the culture tends to follow.
Mm, great answer. Really good stuff. I'm wondering about the design of your space and what we can learn about that because I think these fraternity and sorority houses sometimes they struggle with balancing productivity, which is what we want for the students, but also that social culture, bringing people together. So how do you design in your space for productivity and social culture?
Sure. So when first of all, just out of need, when I designed, on my little piece of graph paper, what I, as a consultant, as a traveling consultant, would need in a remote workspace, I started thinking about those areas and what was important. And I think being very intentional about areas to work and areas to focus and areas then that sort of force people to come together. And so at the Sapphire Suite, we have a beautiful kitchen and an island where people grab coffee and naturally start conversations. Next thing you know, they're solving a business challenge. We have shared tables for work and getting things done, but we have a living room style area for connection. Or a different type of conversation where you don't want a table in between you necessarily. And then our separate business center side. So we aren't just women's co-working, we're female focused co-working, but our 2/3 of our space is business center side where everyone is welcome.
Cool.
Member, non-member, does not matter. And that has meeting rooms, Zoom rooms, and that's where members have their more structured work. But I think when you design those spaces where you have an area for focus and then you have an area for connection, the relationships tend to build more naturally, sort of productivity and community start to come together in a more natural way. Are you seeing any changes in the way they're redesigning fraternity and sorority houses, or?
I mean, I will say this. Certainly, I think the dollar values have gone up considerably. When I look at modern day design at a university like a University of Alabama, as an example, the amount of money that the alumni are pouring into these houses is just astronomical. I mean, it's really outer worldly in terms of their budget. And so that to me, I think is something new that we're seeing that I just haven't seen that kind of an investment. In the past, I think a lot of fraternity and sorority houses were very dated. A lot of these houses have been, a part of the organization since the early 1900s. And so that meant that it was built with whatever specifications we had in the early 1900s, which is different from how we live today in 2026. And so I think now we're starting to see a lot of the things that you're talking about with, big islands and big networking spaces and big living rooms to foster all of those social connections, but also making sure that we have dedicated workspaces as well with all kinds of features, technology, right? How do we have electronic, whiteboards? How do we have built-in projector screens in every room and all of these things like to take advantage of technology, making sure that we have Wi-Fi available in all the rooms and it's operating very well and easy to connect with. So I think we're looking at all of these things. And also, I think we're also looking at the students themselves and what their preferences are. So, as an example, I think in years prior, a lot of these houses would have dorm rooms that would be multiple men or women in that room, and then also bathrooms that would accommodate multiple people in that, multiple shower stalls, as an example, and things like that. But now the preferences are students want to have their own room. And so now we have to retrofit an older house to make sure we have more singles than anything else because that's the preference of the college students today. So I do think that design is changing, and it's really changing with the student in mind as the center of the focus.
I agree. I think it's even commercial develop or residential development, work, live, play. You're starting to
hmm
see that.
for sure. The other thing that I'm thinking about is you're talking about finding mentors or finding other professionals in your space that you can work together with in this co-working space. But that can be very intimidating, especially for a college student to seek out a mentor. I feel like they just think that we're on opposite ends of the earth in terms of experience. So that's just a very intimidating thing to approach somebody and say, "Hey, Tammie, would you be willing to be my mentor?" As a college student, boy, oh boy, that you're asking a lot. So how can college students seek out these mentors without feeling intimidated?
Yeah, I can definitely it's even intimidating, for us sometimes, and you think about imposter syndrome and all these other things that play into that, and I
Mhm.
I think the easiest way to start that conversation is to ask about their experience or perspective, rather than saying, "Hey, Michael, will you mentor me?" I mean, that's even awkward for me to, like, say out loud, it just doesn't feel natural, and so I think what does feel natural is when you're asking someone about their experience or their perspective, and for college students, it's, "Hey, we're talking about this in X class. I would love to hear your perspective on that, even if it's offered to buy coffee or something like that. But, or I'm learning this right now. Is that really what you're seeing out? If they're if in your respective industry, and that feels much more natural and opens the door, I think, to a deeper conversation. And I'm sure you see this as well. A lot of experienced leaders would love to mentor and are willing to mentor, they just rarely get asked. And so the door is wide open, but I do think you're correct in saying, "Hey, will you mentor me?" That's just awkward. And especially a generation that's so used to being digital and not engaged necessarily face to face like maybe you and I were
Yeah.
when we were coming along. And like, I love these kinds of conversations. So when the students or even a new business owner, and they don't necessarily have to be young, maybe they're in a beginning phase of their business, but when they start these conversations with experienced executives or business owners, and then helping them think about leadership and how they want to show up, like, professionally, weaving that into the conversation with a mentor. But I think it just starts with being curious and asking for perspective and experience.
That's excellent advice. And remember, a lot of these mentors, they like to talk about themselves too and talk about their accomplishments. So you're kind of feeding into that, at least initially. And then you can show them how your skills can potentially help them, or just ask them for advice on how they got to where they are. And yeah,
I think it also shows that you're serious
sure.
when it's something that they're studying in a course or they're doing an internship. I think it shows that you're serious about it when you bring actual context and content to the conversation, with curiosity.
Yes. Curiosity is a great thing to have here. No question about that. Now, you are a two times founder here. Um, Tell our audience, mostly college students, a lot of them want to be entrepreneurs. What did nobody tell you about starting a business?
Oh, but it's hard. It's much harder than most people expect, or even than some people make it look. And I don't say that in terms of being discouraging, but people talk a lot about ideas, and I'm definitely one of them. Anybody that knows me will tell you I'm a dreamer. I have a million business ideas, but where it gets hard and where the real work comes in is discipline and resilience. And I think when you start that business, and I'm sure you've read this in business books, but like, you go from doing one job that is something that you're really good about, and that passion that we talked about earlier, something you jump out of bed, loving to do. But you go from doing one job that you're really good at and that you love to do, to doing that job plus six or seven other jobs that you may or may not have any information about, like finance or marketing, or maybe I should have stayed in accounting a little longer. Marketing, finance, hiring. And I think entrepreneurship is less about one big idea or one big breakthrough and more about showing up every day, solving problems, learning quickly, knowing when to adjust, but every mistake is yours to fix, I think, in the beginning. And there's no manager to escalate to, there's no department to, especially as a solo entrepreneur, there is no department to hand this off to, or to blame. Or And so I think accountability is the real price of independence when you own your own business. And that also can mean a lot of decision fatigue, because the responsibility and the accountability ultimately sits with you. And especially if you have a team, that's a lot of responsibility and a lot of pressure. And that decision fatigue kicks in. And sometimes the decisions are not, sometimes they're really difficult. And knowing when to make them and making them are two different things. And so I think that is the hard part when it comes to entrepreneurship is the showing up every day, getting into an area that you're not comfortable with, that you know nothing about, or have had, all of a sudden you're doing invoicing and you not your specialty, but there's no one else to do it in the beginning. And so I think that is the tough part is a lot of big ideas, a lot of big breakthroughs, but what it really comes down to is the day to day, the resilience and the discipline to put in the work.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's definitely, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, it's discipline. It's just getting up every day and doing the work every single day, even on the days that you don't feel like it, and and just making that happen. And if you don't have that discipline, I'm telling you, entrepreneurship is probably not for you. I just want to be honest with you. If you don't have that discipline, because there's nobody telling Tammie or I what to do every single day. I mean, we get up and we are programmed to do the work every single day, no matter what. And if you don't have that inside of you, then you go find something else to do because it's going to be a tough road for you.
Or choose a partner that does have that in them.
Right,
And so, that's a whole separate conversation we could have about visionary versus integrator. If you're
right.
the visionary, you better find you a good integrator, or if you're an integrator, you better find a good visionary, because it takes both of those sort of parallel skill sets and
Yeah.
figuring that out early.
Yeah, and it's very rare to have both of those skill sets. So finding the right people on your team is super important. The one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that students feel a lot of pressure to have their whole career mapped out, and you've obviously been able to pivot throughout your career. What would you say to these students that feel like they have to have their whole career mapped out at like 21 years old?
No, you don't have to have it mapped out. And I think there, even for a lot of 21-year-olds, they've experienced things in their life, whether it's loss of a loved one, or maybe they didn't get that bid they wanted on bid day. And that requires a pivot. And all of a sudden, things can change very quickly. And life happens in seasons. Those of us that, are a little further along in our career, we know that it does happen in seasons. And so I think focus at that age on building relationships, staying curious, developing the skills that you need, have some general idea of what it is that you enjoy to do, and just start there, because a lot of times doors will open in your respective industry that you didn't even know existed until you actually stepped out there. And so I think the most important thing is just to get started, and knowing full well upfront that seasons are going to change. You're not the same person when you graduate from college and maybe 5 years later you're married, and 5 years later you have a kid or a couple of kids. So seasons change, and you will too, and that's okay. Be happy and don't feel like you have to have it all figured out. I don't know that any of us still have it all figured out, but you absolutely do not have to figure it out right now. Just enjoy the moment and look at what's in front of you.
Well, that's excellent advice. I'm still figuring it out too. So we all are to a certain extent. Now, I have one question that I have to ask you because my wife and I, we love to go out and have good food. And Franklin and Nashville, I mean, these are places that have some really great restaurant spots. So I'm wondering, what is your favorite restaurant, whether it be in Franklin or in Nashville? Where are you guys going for a great meal?
Okay. I'm certain that my answer is going to surprise you, and I'm probably not including Nashville in this. I'm just looking at Franklin, and
Sure.
my one of my favorite spots is Amerigo's.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most underrated restaurants in town. The food is great, the service is always excellent, and it's one of the few places I think that you can go and actually have a conversation across the dinner table while getting great food, because the atmosphere is great. It's not so loud that you can't hear your dinner mate across the table, and I we love it. It's probably our go-to. And
Nice.
then there are a lot of great restaurants in Franklin, but
There
for
really
us,
are.
if you want to have a conversation, Amerigo's is where we
Yeah,
go.
Amerigos is very underrated. I agree with you. I think that's the
Great
underrated
menu.
choice.
Yeah, great
It's,
menu, great food. We love it. And
yeah.
so every time I mention it to someone, they're like, "Oh, I always forget that's there."
Yeah, I always forget that it's there.
Good.
It's so underrated. It's
Keep
like the most
forgetting.
underrated restaurant.
It
Great
is.
advice. Really, really good stuff. All right. So if our college students, if they want to learn more about your business, this co-working space, if they want to connect with you, I'm sure they're always looking for mentors and they have questions to ask. Where should they go to connect with you? Can they go in order to learn more about your co-working space?
Sure. So our co-working space is the sapphiresuite.com. It's two P's. We are not the restaurant. We get calls for dinner reservations sometimes. And so just be sure that you're looking at the right website. But we are the sapphiresuite.com. You can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, all the social platforms. Connecting with me personally, I love to connect with others on LinkedIn. And so find me on LinkedIn. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question or if you'd like to come and meet in person. I'm here most every day and always available. So
Very cool. You can connect with her on LinkedIn. It's Tammie Osborne. So TammieOsborne. Go and connect with her on LinkedIn. She'd love to chat. If you have any questions about being an entrepreneur, Tammie is a wonderful person to reach out to, or just come and stop at her co-working space, the Sapphire Suite in Franklin, Tennessee. She'd be happy to host you and show you around. So, Tammie, thank you so much for the time that you spent with us today. It's been great.
thank you. And thank you for having me.
Of course. And to our listeners, if you learned something today from Tammie, I want you to share this episode with your chapter, drop a link in a group chat, share it on social media. You really never know who needs to hear this message today. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Bye for now.